Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a complex and often overlooked chapter of history, the Arab slave trade. This topic is deeply intertwined with the broader history of slavery, yet it is rarely discussed with the same depth as the transatlantic slave trade. We will explore its origins, scale, impact, and legacy, including one of the largest slave revolts in history, the Zanj Rebellion. Let's get started. The Arab slave trade, also known as the Islamic slave trade, began in the 7th century, shortly after the rise of Islam. However, slavery was not a new institution. It was rooted in pre-Islamic Arabian, African, and Mediterranean practices. With the expansion of the Islamic caliphates, the trade grew dramatically, spanning from West Africa to East Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and even parts of Europe and South Asia. Enslaved people were captured through raids, warfare, tribute systems, or purchased from local traders. The Arab slave trade wasn't just a regional phenomenon, it was part of a vast, interconnected global network of exploitation linked to the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, and trans-Saharan trade routes. One key difference between the Arab and transatlantic slave trades was the roles enslaved people were forced into. While the transatlantic trade focused heavily on plantation labor in the Americas, the Arab slave trade had a broader range of purposes. Enslaved men served as soldiers, agricultural laborers, craftsmen, administrators, and even bureaucrats. A notable example is the Mamluks, enslaved soldiers who, over time, established their own dynasties in Egypt and India, such as the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and the Delhi Sultanate in South Asia. Women and children were frequently taken as domestic servants, concubines, or part of elite households. In some cases, they became influential figures within royal courts. The practice of castrating male slaves to create eunuchs was common, especially for those assigned to guard harems or manage court affairs. Many of these eunuchs wielded significant political power, particularly in the Abbasid Caliphate and the Ottoman Empire. Quantifying the scale of the Arab slave trade is challenging due to the lack of comprehensive records. Historians estimate that between 10 to 18 million people were enslaved over more than 1,000 years, from the 7th century until the early 20th century. To put that into perspective, the transatlantic slave trade involved around 12 million Africans over 4 centuries. However, the Arab slave trade was not just massive, but also prolonged. It lasted well into the 19th and early 20th centuries in some regions. For example, the Ottoman Empire practiced slavery until its formal abolition in the late 19th century, though illegal slavery persisted beyond that. In Saudi Arabia, slavery was officially abolished only in 1962, and Mauritania, while not part of the Arab world proper, did not criminalize slavery until 2007. One of the most tragic aspects of this trade was the brutal treatment of enslaved people. The journeys were deadly, whether crossing the Sahara Desert in caravans or sailing across the Indian Ocean in cramped dhows. Many perished from exhaustion, disease, dehydration, or violence. The Sahara Desert became a graveyard for countless individuals, and mortality rates on these routes were alarmingly high, estimated to be as much as 80% in some cases. Survivors faced lives of servitude, often stripped of their cultural and religious identities. While some could integrate into society over generations, especially if they converted to Islam, many remained marginalized, particularly in places like Iraq and Oman, where Afro-descendant communities still face discrimination today. The Arab slave trade profoundly impacted Africa. East African regions, particularly along the Swahili coast and in Zanzibar under Omani rule, became major slave trading hubs in the 18th and 19th centuries. Zanzibar, ruled by the Sultan of Oman, was one of the largest slave markets in the Indian Ocean world. The demand for enslaved people fueled conflicts between African kingdoms, led to widespread raiding, and destabilized entire societies. The demographic impact was severe. Millions of young men and women were removed from African societies, leading to long-term consequences for population growth, economic development, and social structures. This demographic imbalance is one reason some historians argue that the Arab slave trade's effects were as disruptive as the transatlantic trade, though in different ways. Now let us talk about resistance. One of the most significant acts of defiance was the Zanj Rebellion, which took place between 869 and 883. The Zanj were primarily enslaved East Africans, forced to work in the salt marshes of southern Iraq under horrific conditions. Led by a charismatic leader named Ali ibn Muhammad, they organized one of the largest and most prolonged slave revolts in history. At its peak, the rebellion controlled vast territories, including major cities like Basra. The Zanj established their own administrative systems, minted coins, and posed a serious challenge to the Abbasid Caliphate. The rebellion lasted for 14 years, showcasing the resilience and determination of enslaved people fighting for their freedom. If you want to dive deeper into this story, I've got a dedicated video on the Zanj Rebellion. Check it out after this. Despite acts of resistance like the Zanj Rebellion, the Arab slave trade persisted for centuries. Its abolition was a slow and uneven process. European colonial powers, particularly the British, played a significant role in suppressing the trade in the 19th century. The British Royal Navy patrolled the Indian Ocean to intercept slave ships, especially after the abolition of the slave trade within the British Empire in 1807. However, abolition was not solely due to European intervention. Internal reform movements within the Islamic world also contributed. Islamic scholars and leaders began to reinterpret religious texts, emphasizing the ethical imperative to end slavery. This combination of external pressure and internal reform gradually led to the formal abolition of slavery across the region. The legacy of the Arab slave trade is still felt today. It shaped the demographics of the Middle East, North Africa, and East Africa. Afro-Arab communities in countries like Iraq, Iran, Oman, and Yemen are direct descendants of enslaved populations. In places like Zanzibar, cultural influences from the slave trade era, language, architecture, and even cuisine remain prominent. In Africa, the trade contributed to long-term economic underdevelopment, disrupted social cohesion, and left deep psychological scars. Understanding the Arab slave trade is crucial because it reminds us that slavery was a global phenomenon, not confined to any one region or culture. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about history and recognize the resilience of those who endured it. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might be interested. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And if you want to learn more about the Zanj Rebellion, I have got a video on that topic. Check it out. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep learning.